Howdy folks, Kerbo here. This is going to be a basic tutorial on how to convert a mod tractor to the moreRealistic mod. I'm going to assume you know what the moreRealistic mod is, you've got it installed, and you've been enjoying it. And just disclaimer right off the bat, I'm not an expert. I know how to do some basic stuff, that's what I'm going to cover here. Still have a lot to learn, so go forth, read up, experiment, expand on what you learn here. So the first step, say you have a favorite tractor. You want to go over to the XML Databank and look and see if it's already been converted. This is basically a share site for people to share conversions that they've done. So go take a look through this website. I'll put a bunch of links in the description, so be sure to check that out, including this one. You know, look through, see, has it been converted yet? You can search. If it has, download it, you're good to go. Now there's a couple different ways to use an XML file for a tractor that's not in the base mod. All the base tractors in FarmSim, of course, are covered. The way I do it, I'm going to go to my mods folder here, is I use the moreRealistic XML Databank mod, which is kind of a fake mod that puts a folder that you can use. So if we pop back up here, I believe that's on this website. If you go to miscellaneous, no, I lied. I think they moved it around. Toolbox. There we go. So if you download this zip file, it basically gives you that mod, and I have extracted out so I can easily drop more XML. Again, there'll be a link in the description of how to set that up. Basically, there's a converted XML folder. So we're going to make a file in here for a tractor. Now the tractor we're going to use, I know I'm bopping all over the place here, is the Valmet 602. So the naming convention for files that go in this folder is the mod name underscore mr underscore and then the name of the XML file. So in this case, back to my mods, the tractor we're converting is FS17 valmet02.zip. So the file we're going to make is that name underscore mr2, and then the XML file for the 602 tractor we're converting is right here. And I'll try to zoom in on the stuff in the post edit so it's easier to read. Try to follow along my ramblings. So I've already done this conversion. This is the file. We're gonna walk through that step by step. So what I usually do when I'm starting over, starting with a new tractor, is I'll go look in the default vehicles from FarmSim that Dural's already converted for the mod, and just find something that's similar. So go back to my mods folder, find the moreRealistic mod. You just open up that zip file, go look in data, vehicles overriding, and most of the drivable stuff is going to be in steerable. And so for the tractor I'm going to convert the Valmet 602, a close analog from the game is the Hurleman 488. So I took basically this block and kind of just referenced that file as I converted over. So I've added a comment here. What I typically do is I'll add a comment at the top. It's MR for moreRealistic, and then I kind of say what it's based on, if it's based on something, where I got the real data that I'm using to convert, and then any assumptions that I've made, and then what I changed in the file. So for the 602, I found some good data on tractordata.com. There's a lot of websites out there. You can just Google your tractor, and more than likely you'll be able to find info on it. Luckily enough, this had quite a bit of info. So any numbers I've used came from here. So we'll just walk down through the list here. Actually, before I do that, if we go back to the website, there's this Excel file here. It's a spreadsheet. This makes it really easy. Category Lee, it looks like, made it. Big thank you to Lee for making the spreadsheet. It makes converting easy. It does all the math for you. Just fill it in. So I've made a new tab here. And so we'll be referencing that as we go through. So pop back over to the XML. The very first block you need is this block right here. That tells moreRealistic mod that, hey, you need to look at this. It is an MR vehicle. And as I go through here, not all of these are real clear to me what they do. Like I said, I pulled some of this from the 488 conversion. Basically this whole block I just pulled over from the 488. The one thing I do know is drag area. And this is like if you think of it, the vehicle going into the wind, this is the area that's catching the wind, basically. And that number is pulled from the spreadsheet. It's right up here. It's like the first thing. So you just need the width in meters and the height in meters. And what I did is I went to the tractor data site. I know I'm bouncing around here a lot. Hopefully this will make sense. And if we look for the dimensions, I think I had to go here to the full dimensions and tires. We have a height here of 249 centimeters. I didn't have a width, but I kind of based it off the wheelbase and just went a little narrower than the wheelbase, assuming the wheelbase is like the end of the axles. So that's where I came up with 1.8 for the width, and then the 2.49 is the actual height. And then it does some math here, depending on whether it's a tractor or a trailer. So we get 2.91 here. Green is where you put in info. Yellow is the result that you'll need for the XML file. So 2.91, I rounded to 2.9. Now this engine line, this is a copy from the 488. I don't know what everything does on here. I left it all the same, except I turned down the fuel usage factor a little bit just because this tractor is a little smaller than the 488. And it's guesswork. It's tweaking. I have a lot to learn. Like I said, I need to dig through the code and see what all of this does. And similar with lateral forces. I don't know what that does. I just copied from Durrell's edit. So that's this area. But basically, if you don't have the moreRealistic block, nothing else you do will matter because it won't pick it up. So the next item that we went through is the spring and damper and initial compression. So that's the suspension of the vehicle. And that stuff is found in the wheel configuration. And this tractor has a lot of different wheel configurations. You can see here's the default rear wheel drive. If I can spit it out. And then there's the narrow tires, there's twin wheels back. For this basic conversion, I just made them all the same. Each of these would probably have tweaked numbers depending on the wheel configuration. But I just left them all the same. So we're just going to concentrate on this set of wheels right here because all the other numbers are the same. So what did I change? I ended up changing the initial compression on the rear wheels. I'm sorry, on the front wheels. And spring and damper on all four wheels. So let's highlight this. So these numbers came from the spreadsheet. We'll hop over there and see where those came from. The next section down on the spreadsheet is the mass. And the calculations for spring and damper, the suspension, like it says right here, calculated from the loaded mass. So you want to not just take the mass of the vehicle, but the mass of the vehicle and what it might be carrying. So I've got some numbers here with a total of 5.84. Where did I get that number? Well, what I did was I went to the site here, and I assumed the four-wheel drive turbo version, which gives us 2,940 kilograms, or 2.94 tons. In this case, it's I don't know if it's the metric ton, short ton. I don't know what the terminology is. It's not the US ton of 2,000 pounds. It's 1,000 kilograms is a ton. So we pop back over to the spreadsheet. Say, wait a minute, Kerbo, that's not 2.94. Nope, we made some assumptions. So back over in the XML, in the comments, for the spring damper math, we're assuming the 2.94 tons for the tractor, which is the 4-wheel drive turbo version from the data. And then we're assuming a couple other things, 1.9 ton on the 3-point hitch and 1 ton on the front loader. So if we go back, somewhere in here, I got to find the place. It told me what it could hold on the 3-point. Here, 3-point hitch. So the rear lift capacity of the 3-point hitch is 1.9 tons. So that's where I came up with that number. We're assuming it's fully loaded with something on the rear. And then I just pulled this number out of the air, 1 ton on the front loader. It's a completely arbitrary number that I just kind of guessed at. So if you add all those up, then you get the 5.84 tons. And that's the mass that we use for this spring and damper in the spreadsheet. Now, it wants the weight on axle 1, front, and axle 2, the back. So how do we distribute that? You can guess, kind of just based visually on the tractor, the way it's put together. What I did is I went with 40% on the front axle. And the reason I did that, if we scroll down here to the bottom, of where the components are, and we'll cover this all in a little bit. Oh, it looks like I deleted it. There was a comment here in the original XML that said 40% of the mass was on the front axle. So I used that. I used 40%. So I just whipped out the calculator and we put 2.3 on the front and 3.5 on the back. So it takes these numbers here, the loaded, and then for spring and damper, we've got a section here in the spreadsheet. So for the spring, it does math, and it tells you the formulas right here. You can work this all up by hand if you want to. And you can change these. I usually leave them alone. There's notes around the spreadsheet about what the numbers are for, etc., etc. I just kind of left it with modern tractor, which is what it's set for. So if we look on the tractor here, for the spring on the front axle, we have 20.33. And these are the numbers you're going to plug in your wheel configuration. So if we hop back over to the XML, come back up to our wheel config, and you'll see 20.33. So I've just copied those numbers. And the way you can tell what the wheels are doing, if you look at the wheel configuration, you'll have a drive node. And that means it's a driven wheel. It's powered, basically. Another way you can kind of look at it is the rotation speed. It's usually 0 for the unpowered wheels. Now in the case of the 4-wheel drive, it may be different. In this case, we have a file name that it's looking at to pull the wheel out of, which has the size in the file name. So that's just another way to tell. But typically, I'll just assume if it has a drive node, it's a rear wheel on the tractor. Each vehicle is different. You just kind of have to figure out what's what. And then you have is left false and is left true, so you know which one's right and left. So we've got all our numbers from the spreadsheet for spring and damper. Just copy those across. We've got the back wheel. Just pay attention, front, back. Sometimes I forget and I copy them backwards because in the XML file it's usually back wheel and then front wheel. And then we got the damper. So I don't know if it tells in here. The way I think of spring and damper is the spring is kind of how strong you think of it like a spring, you're pushing it together, how strong the suspension is. And then the damper would be kind of like a shock absorber in the car. A damper is how would I describe it? How soon the spring stops springing back and forth. Anyway, you guys probably know what I mean. How much it will continue to bounce. So I think the higher the number, the less bouncy it is. And again, there's notes over here. Big big kudos to the creator of the spreadsheet. It's an awesome tool. And it just kind of explains where the wheels are coming from. And these numbers over here you can tweak depending on the type of tractor. I've just left them alone. They're kind of set up for a modern tractor, so we just roll with it. So that is spring and damper. Initial compression is kind of at rest where the axle is going to be in relation to the tractor, if that makes sense. So I had to change this number here. Actually, I had that backwards. This is the rear wheel. So I think I have my numbers backwards. I just realized. Say what? I had to adjust the back axle to line up the wheel. And I just noticed now that I think I told you backwards for the drive note. That doesn't make any sense though. We can edit out the awkward pauses. Yeah, those are the front wheels. The 114R24s. These are the rear wheels. The rotation speed is... Yeah, I told you backwards, so I think I have these numbers in here backwards. Oh well, we'll leave the awkward crap in here. I'm still learning, like I said. This is a basic conversion. And I did tell you backwards. If you look at the size of the tires, these are 36-inch tires. These are 16-inch tires. So I've got these numbers backwards, right? Because the front wheel for spring should be 20.33. And this would be the front wheel. Yeah, I've got these numbers backwards. So I need to switch those around. So completely ignore anything I said about these being backwards. They are correct. Front first, typically in XML, and back last. So anyway, moving on. I'll fix that. We have the motor set up. So if we scroll down to, we got a lot of different wheels on here. Scroll down to the motor configuration section. We have two different motor setups here. We have a 58 horsepower option and the 66 horsepower option. The only real difference here between the two motors is the torque scale. Which I'm not sure what torque scale 1 is. I don't know what the number is, but basically the higher the ratio, the more powerful it is. So you can see the torque scale here is 276. This is 0.32. And I tested in moreRealistic, and it's about 55 horsepower as far as MR is concerned. So I didn't change this. You can tweak that for the extra 3 horsepower if you want to. It's just a numbers game. And that can be found. There's actually tools here in the spreadsheet. You can fill in the torque scale from the XML, and then what you're getting in game, and then what you actually want, and it'll give you the new number. I've actually done that on some of the conversions. But for 3 horsepower, I didn't bother changing the number. So what did we change in the motor config? We changed the brake force and the gear ratios. So brake force, pretty self-explanatory. It's how much brakes you have. And that's calculated from the spreadsheet. 1.84. That is brake force tractor. So you put in the tractor mass. And for this, I just use the mass of the tractor itself. I'm not 100% sure, but I think, at least that's the way I've seen it done. I think you want to use the mass of just the vehicle. And then I think MR will figure out the added mass, like if you're carrying bales or whatever. So I just took the lowest deceleration value, 5 meters per second squared. If you want a little stronger brakes, you can use the higher number. It's just preference. I think even this number is a little strong. So that's where I got 1.84 from. I just got to round it up. And then we change the gear ratios to get the speed that we want. So the number we need to know here for the spreadsheet is the max RPM. That's how fast your motor is going to turn over at top speed. And then we have the minimum forward gear ratio and the minimum backward gear ratio. Oops. So where do these numbers come from? Again, we go to the spreadsheet. And it is this section right here. You tell it the maximum RPM of the motor and your max forward speed and your max backward speed, and it gives you the numbers to plug into the spreadsheet. So in this case, our forward speed is 33, and that's kilometers per hour. Everything in here is metric. And backward is 10. And you can tweak that however you want. I didn't change that. I didn't change the speeds. I did change the gear ratios. So I took the speeds that were in here, plugged them into the spreadsheet, and got the numbers. And actually, I don't know. If we go back to overview, does it have any speeds in here? Wheelbase, engine. Got a fair amount of info on the engine. So, you know, it actually says the turbo diesel is 2300. So, you know, you can tweak it to match whichever configuration you want. I just left it at default. Whoever made the original 602. And 6 forward to reverse. You can change your gearbox config however you want, but I don't see a speed in here. So we just left it whatever the original 602 author had it. But I did tweak the gear ratios. So plug the max RPM, the speeds from the XML, and it gives you these numbers so that they'll actually match up in game. I didn't change this. That's something else you can change. All right, brake force we covered. I think other than the mass, that is it. Oh, I did change the fuel capacity. I think it was 65 by default. I changed it to 60 just to match tractordata.com. And then the remaining thing is the center of mass and the mass. And that's typically at the bottom of the file. You want to look for the components. And in this case, there's 2. And what these refer to is the components in the scene graph if you open up the tractor in the editor. So we will go do that real quick. I have a lot of stuff open. So I've got the original mod right here extracted on my desktop for easy reference. And we're going to open up the Valmino 2 i3D file in the editor. And you can see we have 2 components here in the scene graph. Switch over to the outside camera. And basically we have the whole tractor except the front axle, and then the component 2 is the front axle here, which can change depending on which version of the tractor you have. But that's all we really need to know. So we come back over here. I tweaked the center of mass a little bit on the main tractor. Let me copy that. And then I added this MR set mass, and that just says more realistic. This is the mass of this component of the vehicle. So I kind of just took a best guess. We want to end up with 2.75, I think. Is that the number we had? Nope, I used 2 different tractor configs. Oops. My numbers are a little off. This is for the turbo version. I think I used the other version for the MR mass, so we can fix that. But so I said the front axle weighs 0.4, and this, like I said, that's just another number that I just kind of made up that felt right. Not a whole lot of science behind that. But if we take 2.94, and I'm too lazy to subtract 2.54. So I'm just going to go ahead and change that. But anyway, component 1, just know that this refers to the scene graph. So this is the main tractor. We're saying most of the weight's there. And the center mass, I did tweak a little bit, so let's copy that again. The way I check the center mass is in the editor. You can just go create a new transform group, and we'll paste the coordinates of the center of gravity in there, or center of mass. And if you do, if you come up here to translate X and you do Control-Shift-V, it'll paste all three of those values in there. So that is our center of mass. It was down here closer to the bottom by default. I felt it should be moved up a little bit because there's, there's the engine mass and a little bit from the cab, although the cab is fairly negligible compared to the rest of the mass of the tractor. You can play around with this to your heart's content until it feels right to you. There's not really a wrong answer here, as long as it's within reason. But if you tweak that around and you get some different numbers, you can come back over here to Translate X, type Control-Shift-C. If we come back here to our editor and then do Control-V, it copies all three of those numbers. So it's just a handy shortcut, Control-Shift-C and V instead of just Control-C and V. But I will leave those numbers as they are. I think this is a relative center of mass from the object itself, because I tried putting in real numbers from the editor and it got really wonky. So I think that's fine. We'll just leave that alone. And that is it. That is all the changes required for a basic conversion of a tractor. I hope that made sense. I know I kind of rambled a little bit. How long are we? We're at 26 minutes, so that was a little longer than I intended. But I hope that makes sense. Like I said, I'll put a bunch of links in the description for all the various things I talked about. Oh, I forgot to cover something. Don't go away. I'll edit this so it's seamless. We didn't fully go over the initial compression. The reason I changed that on the back axle is because once I changed the spring and damper settings, it's a little bit hard to describe, but let me get over here. The axle part wasn't lined up with the center of the wheel. It was I think it was a little low or a little high. So the initial compression is when the tractor's at rest, how much is the suspension compressed? So when you change those numbers to the more realistic settings, sometimes the axle and the wheel center line won't line up. You can tweak that initial compression number to get it to line up. And I took a wild guess and said, hey, instead of 20, let's try 40, and it happened to be spot on. So you can just play with this. You can go bigger, smaller, just until it lines up. Just take a look at it in game. And that is that. So with that, thanks for watching, and I will catch you in the next video.